Final Stop Brazil. Chapter 23. Neo-Nazism, Asylum, Ghana, West Africa. Kathy was mad with jealousy. She still claimed me completely for herself. I didn't tolerate Robert in the house. Again there was noise and strife. Sometimes at night she climbed out of her window and ran away. Again I had to let the police search for her, which made Robert very nervous. He wanted absolutely nothing to do with the police. This, however, got me wondering. Then one day my landlord asked me for a talk and declared, "My family and I, we belong to the Jehovah's Witnesses. Our faith is forbidding the mix of races. I cannot approve that your boyfriend accompanies you into this house. Moreover, this is a small village and I don't want the people gossiping." I was so perplexed I didn't know what to say. Did all this shit racism start all over again? I had a raging temper, but I told myself that he had no legal basis to demand what skin colors were in my apartment as guests. I let him know exactly this, and he simply no longer left me in peace. In the Sky Club were also dark clouds coming up, very dark. It happened on the very day the Berlin Wall fell and East Germany no longer existed. The club was, as always, busy and in good atmosphere when suddenly something was happening no one, least I, would have expected. A horde of neo-Nazis and skinheads had ganged up and planned to run down this nigger and foreignerhood. Basically, a lot of guests were staying outside in front of the entrance. They were the first ones faced with the gang. I heard loud screams and then saw everybody running around like wild. The guests tried to get back into the club when Penny and Neville, followed by JC, other staff and guests, came running down the stairs, and a wild mass fight began. Our people attempted desperately, together with the guests, to prevent these madmen from rushing into the club. Like frozen, I watched how our people were fighting in front of my cash counter, struggling to keep these idiots out. Blood was flooding all over, lots of blood. Then glass bottles were flying through our windows. I saw Neville being attacked by one of these shitty skinheads when I awoke from my rigid state and reacted. Under the cash table was an electroshocker. I grabbed it and shouted, "Neville!" While Neville was trying with one arm to ward off one of the skinheads, he grabbed with the other the stick, but due to the confusion couldn't activate it. Instead, used it successfully as a club. Quick as lightning, I closed the cash box, slipped the keys into my jeans pocket, and flew out of the small cash booth the same moment as Neville shouted, "Rita, get out of there! Get away from the door!" Just in the right moment, I reached Neville's office. Shortly after, a large stone hit the windshield on the side where I had sat inside the booth, and the fragments flew in all directions. One of our doormen had not so much luck, and lost his left eye in the senseless affray. These cowards withdrew and disappeared just before the police finally arrived. This night was over. The club was closed, and wounds were taken care of. During my 5 years, I remained faithful to the Sky. This kind of attack, fortunately, did not happen again. But over the entire Germany rolled from this time on a wave of violence against foreigners. Asylum homes, foreigner meeting points, incendiary attacks and violence against individuals, especially dark-skinned people. To make matters worse, the police, in a lot of cases, stood by passively and acted on the wrong side. Dark-skinned people from now on had to undergo permanent ID card checks. In the office, Frank and I talked about the first attack of the Americans on Iraq. The Gulf War had begun. At home, since a long time, I was thinking about Tony. When I saw the terrible images of the Iraq War on television and the reports of dead American soldiers, I wondered if Tony was there too, if he was still alive. Anyway, in my heart, he would stay forever, he and his son. Since it was totally clear to my landlord that he had no legal basis to throw me out of the apartment because of Robert, he harassed me constantly, now with another attempt. He kept on demanding to see Robert's passport, with the reason he wanted to know who is staying on his property. I told him that he didn't have any right for this either. Yes, that is true, I don't, but we can indeed call the police, who have the right to do so. I just want to make sure that I don't have any criminals in my house. The atmosphere was getting unbearable, and I was more than irritated. My goodness, Robert, show him the fucking passport, so that he leaves us finally in peace. Initially, Robert said nothing, but asked me to come with him to Hamburg Oldesdorf. Never before had I been there, and had no idea what to expect. We visited a refugee home. There he introduced me to Prince from Ghana. When both told me that Prince was Robert's brother, I was flabbergasted. But that was not all. In fact, Robert was not his real name, but Ampenkwamedako, and was just like his brother from Ghana, and not from England. In Germany he stayed illegally. When I asked him how it was possible for him to have a regular job if he was illegal, he explained to me, "The boss lets me work illegally too. Of course he pays me less than the notified employers. But for me it's okay." Well, now it was perfectly clear to me why he wanted nothing to do with the police. Then I met Marion, the girlfriend of Prince, and learned that the two intended to marry. I was very surprised, though, that a man such as Prince, he was very handsome in contrast to his brother, gave himself to a primitive and, for my taste, ugly woman like Marion. But soon I realized that a marriage to a German woman secured the German residence permit. So this was not a marriage out of love, at least not on his side. The wedding would take place in Ghana, and I already knew now what was coming next. And I was right. Robert and Prince tried to persuade me to fly together with Marion to Ghana, not only to accompany her, but to get married as well. I frowned. "And whom shall I marry there? You're not flying, are you?" I asked, confused, turning to Robert. Prince explained to me that Robert could not fly, since he was without papers. However, Prince was going to depart during the next few days to organize papers for Robert and organize a man who would marry me in Robert's name. "That is a high-degree fraud," I protested. But Prince answered soothingly, "Believe me, no one will notice this. In Ghana, the necessary people would be paid, and after marriage we just needed to go to the German consulate in Accra to have the marriage officially certified and legalized. After my return, Robert could then convert his illegal status into a legal residence permit." I was skeptical and asked for a little time for reflection. At home, I was weighing the risks. What could happen to me? The offer to go to Ghana, to Africa, was very tempting for me, because I was still full of curiosity and hungry for anything new. What countries had I already seen? Practically none. Of course, I would have preferred to fly to Jamaica, but maybe someday. The question was, what should happen with Kathy during my absence? I couldn't take her because she had no holidays. But this question was practically solved by itself during the following days, namely, when I received a written notice of termination of my apartment. Reason, home requirement. Had the shithead found something based on legal ground to have me chucked out? Robert suggested that we should stay in with Marion until we found something else. The relationship between me and my landlord had become hostile, so I also put no value to wait for the notice period. Thus, everything went off all over again, but this time I did it all by myself. I had no help anymore. So I searched alone for a warehouse in the Freeport for my furniture. Found it, packed my things and Kathy's, rented a truck, and for the first time in my life, I drove a truck myself. Marian's apartment was very spacious for her and her 2 small children, with whom Kathy would now share the room. Robert and I would stay in the living room. He too was now moved out of his furnished room. For the 7th time since she started school, I registered Kathy in yet another school. Now we were situated at the northern end of Hamburg, and again began the Elbe Tunnel stress, but this time in reverse direction. My job was now in the south, and I commuted from north to south and back. I didn't necessarily make friends with Marian. Her somehow low level of intelligence was nothing for me, but we all tried to make the best of it. Prince was taking care of the cleanliness in the apartment and did all the housework. He cooked and even took care of the 2 children, while Marian sat all day watching TV. Kathy seemed now to have resigned to her fate and accepted Robert. Moreover, to my surprise, she got on very well with Marian. Robert promised me to take very good care of Kathy if I would fly. I didn't love Robert, and for myself there was no interest whether he could remain in Germany or not. On the other hand, I was sure that I would never love someone like Tony again, therefore never be getting married for love. The train had long since departed, and I had by now already 2 failed marriages behind me, without any trace of love. Why shouldn't I risk a 3rd one? At least it would help Robert, and I didn't have to lose anything anyway. Thus I decided for my great adventure far away from Germany. Before, though, I had to swallow but yet another confession from Robert. I haven't told you yet that I have a daughter who lives with my parents. She is 6 years old. Any other surprises, or was that it? I asked suspiciously. I sorted out clothes from Kathy which had become too small to take them for Dorothy. Also bought some new garments for her and packed them in my suitcase. Marian and I went to be vaccinated against hepatitis and yellow fever, took bravely the malaria tablets. Since Robert was too stingy to book a return flight from Hamburg, Marian and I had to drive all the way down to Düsseldorf, where I paid horrendous parking fees for 14 days in the airport parkhouse. The closer the first flight of my life came, the more nervous I became. Marian felt similar. She had never flown before. After the check-in, we still had plenty of time to delve in the tax-free stores and finally sat down in a restaurant where we could watch the runway. We couldn't eat anything, and so we limited ourselves to coffee. My stomach cramped up by the view of the aircraft. In brief, I would sit in one of these machines. I tried to convince myself that the planes looked all new and proper, but this illusion was quickly destroyed when I followed Marian's terrified eyes. There was a machine rolling in our direction which truly awakened the impression as if it was a remnant from World War II. The white paint barely covered the grille. Clearly visible, however, was the inscription, Ghana Airways, and the distinctive flag. If I survive this, I'll kill Robert, I uttered. Our time came and we boarded the hellish machine, and together with us half of the population of Ghana, with much fanfare and noise. The big mamas, as soon as they sat, kicked their shoes off and swung their legs on the seats. Black children were running, jumping and screaming through the rows of the seats. The men struggled with the hand luggage and finally sat down too, armed with plastic cups in hand to bring out their plastic bags, the whiskey they had bought before in the tax-free shops. Stunned, I watched intently these activities, which one Ghanaian misunderstood, passing me also a cup of whiskey. Automatically, I took the cup and swallowed the whiskey on X. Until then, Marian said nothing. only watched me horrified as I shook myself from the burning drink and remarked, "The only way I can stand this madness here." When the machine started, the stewardess made some efforts to show the passengers what to do in case of an emergency landing and where the emergency exits are. The whole performance looked more like a dance to me, and I thought to myself, well, if that will help. Then suddenly the machine was very fast, and I stood with my foot on the imaginary brake. The rest of me was cramped onto Marion, who was just the same cramped onto me. We had probably left an image, as if we really loved each other. Before we realized, we were already quite high in the air, and I was calmer and relaxed. All around me the people listened to music, sang loudly themselves, or talked and screamed like on a marketplace. From the first row conversations were held with the last row, and sentences were thrown back and forth. I tried to remember how it was on the television when they showed the planes from the inside during a flight. Somehow it all appeared more civilized than here. But tipsy how I was from the whiskey, I didn't really care at the moment. All we needed now was to come down again. And we came. Sooner than expected, because this hell machine made a stopover in London Heathrow. On top of my fear, I now had hellish earache and was numb. Why does this happen to me? I thought, and I'll kill Robert. Finally, on the ground, this machine rumbled and rattled with a big noise across the runway that I thought the wheels might fall off. Then we stood, and I thanked the Lord that I was still alive. We waited about 2 hours while more Ghanaians boarded. In fact, Marian and I were the only whites in this machine. After another half hour, this shaking thing of hell rattled off again. Marian and I moved back to our clinging monkey position. This time I was not calm when we were in the air, because I heard a remarkably loud noise which not had been there before. I looked around, but no one seemed to take notice of it, or gave the impression of concern. Marian was not pale, but white in her face, and I needed only to look at her to know that she heard it too. I stood up and asked the stewardess for a whiskey. I needed it now. Maybe it was just imagination, and only the two of us heard the noise. "Do you want to get drunk now, or what?" Marian hissed at me the same moment as the stewardess announced that we should put on the safety belt because we would perform a stopover in Rome, as one of their engines showed a slight problem. However, there would be no reason whatsoever to be concerned. Before I put the safety belt, I tipped my second whiskey in once. Not too long ago, since this earache had stopped and I could hear again, now everything all over again. I wondered how often we still would be landing and taking off until we reached Africa, if we ever reached Africa. Well, after all, we were already in the south of Europe. But now I remembered geography and suddenly realized that from now on only water would be underneath, and I sent another hurried prayer to heaven that this was the last stop. 2.5 hours we spent waiting in Rome. Meanwhile, due to the whiskey, I took the take-off pretty easy. Nevertheless, I listened for any unusual noises, but decided that I couldn't do that for the next 8 hours without going crazy. I had the choice between further whiskies or a pill against traveling sickness. So I decided for the pill, because arriving in Ghana totally drunk would certainly not make the best impression. In with a very short time, I drifted off to sleep, listening first to the smooth soul music of the board radio. As Maria nudged me, I woke up again. "You can remove the headphones now. We have arrived." It was hectic around us, and I made 3 crosses when we were allowed to get off and even alive. Outside on the runway hit me the oppressive, unusual heat, which was even worse inside the airport building. After the immigration desk, we took our luggage to the customs. There I was asked to open my suitcase. I remembered how I had to sit on the suitcase while Robert tried desperately to close it, because the jerk had squeezed at the last moment closes for mother and Christ knows who else into it. He wanted all to be taken. I was seized by panic. If I opened this suitcase now, I would never, ever be able to close it again. So I handed the man $20 and solved this problem. Prince was already waiting for us with 2 companions. All of them grabbed our luggage and off we went. First we drove from the airport to the center of Accra. The fact that the Africans were not living in shacks anymore was already clear to me, but this modern city with predominantly white beautiful buildings and beautiful gardens astonished me after all. It was bustling with activity, rained on the streets, and the traffic was regulated by an elegant-looking policeman in a petty uniform. What he performed in the middle of the road kind of reminded me of the dance of the stewardess. We could do well with such traffic police. All the stress would loosen up a little, I remarked, and everybody laughed out loud. The bright sun and blue sky made me quickly forget the stress of the flight. First we stopped at a bank for changing money. When I wished to change $300 in Ghanaian cedis, Prince held me back and told me, change only $100. With that you will last a long time. First I doubted, but when I saw the mountains of notes I received for the $100, I understood what he meant. We all carried 3 thick bundles of banknotes. Marion and I were hungry. But what should we do with all the bills? Take them into a restaurant? Or perhaps leave them inside the car? Prince decided that we should get right on the road to Kumasi. With all these new impressions, I initially forgot my hunger and absorbed everything I saw. We left the city and initially drove along the coast, where I discovered many small fishing boats on the sea. It was a glorious sight, of now setting sun reflecting on the sea. Then we passed the beach where many people danced to loud music and some cavorted into the water. Let us pause here, I begged, but Prince refused. To take a dip into the water and swim a bit would have been exactly the right thing. For this we still have time later. Now we first have a few hours of driving ahead of us. A couple of hours, I decided, better not to ask exactly how many hours. Finally, we stopped at the roadside, where flying dealers were offering their goods. Prince bought for everyone grilled meat kebabs and fruits similar to melons. However, they looked very much like them but tasted different. Prince explained that they called them bobo. The name was strange to me, but the fruit tasted very good. He supplied us with Coca-Cola and mineral water. Then we continued our journey. This street market seemed to be endless, and the only lights were small fires everywhere, which I thought very romantic. Prince began to lecture us. Never eat any food that is offered to you, only if I give you the okay, and never drink any other than mineral water. Water from the pipes is for you only for brushing teeth, and you leave the hotel where you will stay only and exclusively in my company. Well, that would be great fun, only with our nanny. Slowly the lights subsided on the road, and it was pitch dark outside. Without street lights, the road was illuminated only by car headlights. Now and then I could still see women in their colorful traditional dresses with their children walking along the roadside. Then I saw for a long time nothing more, but could feel that this road was no longer a road, but felt more like a ploughed field. After about an hour, not only my butt was aching, but all of my body. I thought back to Robert and had new strong desires to murder him. Suddenly appeared headlights on the roadside, and I saw men in camouflage with guns. That's it. Now your last hour has struck, I said to myself. Prince quietly hissed at us to stay calm and not say a word, as he stopped the car. Panic began to spread as the men used flashlights to look into the car. Were these bandits attempting to rob us? Prince spoke to the men in a local dialect I didn't understand, and finally we were allowed to continue. I wiped the cold sweat from my face. "That was the police on road patrol," explained Prince. We drove, or rather we rumbled on over the field in the dark. Far as wide, nothing was visible. We didn't even meet another car. Despite the pain all over my body, I halfway dozed off, but was quickly wide awake again and terrified, actually stood vertically in the car when I heard a loud bang. Prince swore, and I thought, are they shooting every single one of us now? Nothing like it. It was a flat tire. I was not sure which desires prevailed, some whiskey on eggs or to strangle Robert's neck. We stood in the middle of the pitch-black wilderness with a flat tire. What would probably come next? The three men were standing in front of the car discussing, and so I decided to get out too. "And now?" I wanted to know, and Marion asked, "Are there lions or other wild animals around here?" Everyone turned to her to give her a somewhat strange gaze. With help from the cigarette lighters, Prince began to loosen the wheel. Every few minutes another one took a turn with his lighter, since those things were getting hot. In fact, he managed the wheel change, and we continued our journey. When we arrived in Kumasi, the sun was already coming up. We passed through some villages, and then Prince parked right in front of a hotel and paid the rooms for us. When suitcases and the bundles of money were stored in the room, I merely heard Prince saying that he would return in the afternoon, because I was already on the way into a deep sleep. I awoke in a dark room and hardly believed it. I had slept completely through my first day in Ghana. First of all, I groped my way until I found a light switch. The room made a very genteel impression, and the bathroom too, which I had to use first now. I had just finished when it knocked at my door. Marion came in, and I saw immediately that she was not in very good mood. "You know what time it is?" And I shook my head. "It is 9:30. It is 8:30 in the evening, local time. Prince wanted to be back in the afternoon." This I imagined a little different. She pouted. "Ah, yes, now I remembered it again. The two were a couple." I said soothingly that Africans have a different time than us. When Robert says 4 o'clock, he means actually 8 o'clock. It's Africa time. With a grim face, she rushed out the door again. I just shrugged my shoulders. An hour later, Prince indeed came back and took us for dinner in a restaurant where we had some good steaks with chips and salad. "When are we going to meet your parents and the rest of the family?" I asked, whereupon Prince answered that we would meet the family the next day. We stayed a while in the restaurant and took a few drinks to be taken back in the hotel afterwards. The next day, Prince also belated by a few hours, and so I ventured alone in front of the door. Naturally, I attracted general attention and shouting. Countless children surrounded me, and all shouted, "Oh Bruni, oh Bruni!" I immediately fell in love with these cute black children with their large, astonished black eyes. I picked up one of the little ones and cuddled it while all the others were talking excitedly at the same time. All the children wanted to touch the Obruni, white. Unfortunately, I didn't understand all of them, but some older children spoke English and asked me lots of questions. Where I came from, my name, what I was doing there, whether I have children, and. My eyes wandered over to the other side of the road, and I saw a store there. I put down this about 2-year-old girl with her black curls, made myself way through the crowd of children crossed the street, and entered the store where some young men were hanging around in front of it, and followed me with their eyes. I quickly found what I was looking for and bought loads of sweets. Poor as these children were dressed, without even wearing shoes or sandals on their feet, they surely didn't get sweets very often. One of the young men suddenly stood beside me when I grabbed the bags of sweets and addressed to me, "How are you? What's your name? Do you want to marry me?" Surprised about a somewhat hasty proposal of marriage, I answered, "Don't you think it is a bit too early to think of marriage?" He laughed and showed shining white teeth in his handsome face, and I had to laugh also, which froze in my face, though, as I turned the next moment and looked at the frowned face of Prince. "Haven't I told you to wait at the hotel? Where's Marion? What are you doing here anyway, and why are there so many children?" The children didn't know what to make of Prince, who was wildly gesticulating with his hands in the air in front of me, and scattered in all directions. "I only stepped outside the door," I carefully defended myself, and took notice of his friend, who had now gotten out of the car, furtively grinning. I paid no longer attention to Prince, instead took the sweets from the bags, and the kids came back excited with loud cheers. I saw nothing more than clear little black outstretched hands. Quickly, the sweets were all gone, but I had the feeling that some children had been left empty-handed, so I distributed the entire change which I received in the shop. Prince stood with folded arms outside the entrance door of the hotel and shook his head disbelievingly. I walked past him into the hotel and asked, "What does a brony mean?" "White woman," was brusquely replied. Prince had all hands full to do to control me because I didn't let anyone control me. So I had put him during the following days on hard trials of patience because he was just busy trying to find me. Concerning the question, "Do you want to marry me?" I got used to it quickly because I was asked this at each corner. The story with the children became a bit more complicated because since that day the children permanently blocked the entrance door of the hotel to call for the Obruni. The hotel manager asked me desperately not to give any more to the children. Well, I couldn't really stop it completely. However, I always gave them something secretly. On this day, we drove into the village to meet the family of Robert and Prince. Here we were also greeted by a crowd of people before we even got out of the car. Who were friends and who relatives I couldn't distinguish too well. A pretty young woman came up to me, hugged me, and introduced herself in fluent English as Robert's and Prince's cousin. She was very congenial, and we understood immediately. From now on, she was our interpreter and accompanied us almost everywhere. The older people, including Prince's parents, spoke no English. Prince was complaining incessantly about the heat, and constantly wiped the sweat off his face with a towel which hung over his shoulder. I had to laugh about it, because I didn't mind the heat at all. "Ma'am, you come from here. Look at me. I don't sweat at all." I indeed realized for the first time that I was far more active during this hot weather than usual, and while everybody else avoided unnecessary movements, I jumped around full of energy like a young deer. Marion was very quiet and hardly spoke. She was pissed off with Prince, who hadn't stayed overnight with her as she had expected. Otherwise, he kept her also very distant. We entered an open bar, only covered with a thatched roof, and Prince ordered Coca-Cola for us. A striking number of men were hanging around here, I noticed. "Is nobody working here?" I asked, and was told that predominantly the women were working. Great way of sharing. The women work and the men enjoy themselves in the bar or hang around in the street. Slipped out of my mouth, and I earned laughter for it. A man drank some liquid from a so-called calabash, a hollow shell, and offered me to try. I grabbed it and tried the odd but not bad-tasting home-brew alcoholic drink before Prince had the opportunity to protest. Then we strolled along some concerts which served as stores and stock for spare car parts. A young woman beckoned to me, and I disappeared into her hut, where I once again had to answer umpteen questions. She told me that she owned the spare parts together with her husband, to whom she was married for 2 years. They were quite well off and couldn't really complain, but she was plagued by another worry. Since her marriage, she tried everything. What she meant with everything wasn't quite clear to me. To get pregnant. Unfortunately, without success. But she knew that in Europe was a drug which would help her to get pregnant. Well, she knew more than me. Wait a minute, I said. Sometimes it just takes a little longer until a woman becomes pregnant. You just have to have a little patience. If you both are still without success in a few years, you can both still be examined by a doctor. It doesn't have to be on your part, but there might as well be a problem with your husband. She listened to me attentively, but then explained, "No, I need this medicine. If I'm not pregnant very soon, my husband has the right to take another wife. His family is pushing him already, and I don't know what to do." I promised to go and look for this medicine after my return, as Prince arrived at the hut, puffing and sweating. "Rita, don't do it again. We have been looking for you everywhere." Upon leaving the hut, she asked, "Are you coming to visit me again?" Also, I saw Prince scowl. I promised it. Then Prince took Marion and me to an enormous brick house, the house of his parents, where uncles, aunts, cousins, and who knows else were living also. In front was a room where several women were sitting in front of old sewing machines, sewing dresses and trousers. Prince showed us proudly the silk they used for it. This silk is exclusively made in Ghana, and the sewing machines have been bought with Robert's money. We passed several closed spaces and then went out into the backyard, where on one side a woman was preparing fufu, mashing it over an open fire. On the other side sat an elderly man on a wooden bench under a tree. He gave a very exalted and proud impression. It was Robert's father. When he got up to greet us, I was amazed how tall this man was. Prince and Robert both were not nearly as tall as their father. The usual polite talks were translated on both sides, when I heard a woman entering the yard, screaming and cursing. I turned around and saw how she was dragging a little girl behind her. Scared, she was trying to hide. Prince's cousin explained to me what I already knew. This is Dorothy. Her big eyes stared at me anxiously as I slowly walked up and bent down to her. But instead of greeting me, she began to weep openly, whereupon the woman beat her brutally in the back and shouted at her. Furious, I turned to Prince's cousin and called out, "Tell her to stop beating her at once." Angry, I glared at the woman, who stared blankly from one to another, as she now heard Mary's answer, but didn't understand it. "But that's normal, Rita. She has beaten Dorothy because she was disrespectful and rude with you. Dorothy is afraid because she had never seen white people before." Still mad, I said to Mary, "No wonder she's afraid. As long as I'm here, nobody will beat her again. Tell this woman." Later I learned that this woman was Mary's mother and the aunt of Prince and Robert. Prince took the gifts I brought for the family at my request out of the car, and while Prince packed clothing, shoes, and other gifts to the family, which spread a great pleasure, I stood with Mary at my side, still facing Dorothy, who eyed me suspiciously from a safe distance. Initially, I took candy from a bag and held it out to her as if holding it out to feed a shy animal. With downcast eyes, she slowly came up to me, but then she jumped in front with a cat-like speed and tore the candy from my hand. "Dorothy!" Mary admonished her sharply, but I objected. "Leave her. She needs time." "Does she speak English?" "Only a few words. She has only just started to learn English in school, answered Mary. Where's her mother? And what did you folks tell her about me? I inquired further. Mary looked at me in astonishment. Hasn't Kwame told you anything? Her mother is dead, and my mother explained to her that you are her new mother. I was horrified. How could these people tell her something like that? Especially since she never saw a white person before. No wonder the girl nearly died with fear. Even for me came the surprising. I kept my anger to myself, only asked Mary to translate for me. Dorothy, come here to me. Look, I have more sweets and something much more beautiful for you. You don't need to fear. I won't hurt you. I just want to know you and be your friend, I said softly. Mary gave me a confused glance, and I knew why. Tell her exactly what I said, please. Friend, and not mother, because that's what scares her. She actually came a bit closer after Mary translated my words, but kept her gaze lowered. I then took more candy from the bag, gave them to her, and then took the wrapped doll I had bought before the trip out of the bag. This is for you. You can unwrap it. Uncertain, she looked over at Mary, who nodded encouragingly. When she held the unwrapped doll in her arms and I saw her bright eyes, I knew I had won. But more than about the doll, she was delighted about the clothes I brought her and wanted to try all of them at the same time. So we came closer as I helped her to get changed. One particularly pleased her, and she refused to take it off again. I didn't notice Prince's mother, meanwhile, had come into the yard. I turned around as she spoke in a resolute tone, but not unloving, to Dorothy. Despite the signs pointing to hard years and hard work, she was still a very beautiful woman with certain elegance. She greeted me with a warm, welcoming smile. Dorothy shyly stepped between us now and said softly in English, "Thank you," before she greeted her grandmother. I bent back down to her and let Mary ask her if I was her friend now. In response, I received a shy smile and a nod. As a friend, I might embrace you, no? I let Mary ask again, but there were these anxious big open eyes, now looking for help at Mary, who once again said something in a sharp tone to her that I didn't understand. No, leave her. She needs time. Ask her if she would like if I come back tomorrow. A renewed smile and vigorous nod were the answer. Only then did I notice the rest around me and saw Prince holding a beautiful little boy on his lap. Not far from him sat a young woman who I previously not had noticed. My guess was that she was the mother of this boy. Now and then she spoke with Prince, while Marian sat next to Prince with a long face. Uh-oh, I sensed evil here. That night I didn't sleep. I didn't love Robert, but this little girl I had enclosed from the first moment in my heart. She alone was reason enough for me to go through with this marriage here. My decision was clear. I would bring this girl to Germany. The next day I waited impatiently for Prince, and heard only little of Marian's complaining at our breakfast. The night before, she and Prince had a pretty strong argument, and she threatened now to bust the wedding. Of course, she had also suspected, as I did, that the little boy was a son of Prince. But Prince neither spoke anything about it, of course not, nor confessed anything. On one hand, I understood Marian, because Prince left her alone at night, and I would have been just as mad in her place. On the other hand, I also understood Prince by wanting the marriage, but not out of love, but for quite different reasons. It was perfectly clear to me that Robert had the same motivations as his brother, even though I knew that Robert was very happy with me and much preferred to sleep with me. When Prince arrived, we initially went to a phone shop to call Robert and Kathy. When I spoke with him, I got the impression as if Kathy seemed to come to terms with Robert quite well. That calmed me down. Robert was delighted when I told him enthusiastically about Dorothy, and when I announced I will bring Dorothy to Germany. After the phone call, we strolled past the large square. Markets always attracted me like magic. And while Prince and Marion were fighting again, I was already immersed in the crowd. I eagerly bought a variety of exotic fruits. The dealers had their fun to explain the names of the fruits and let me try everything. The offered meat I found disgusting, though. In the blazing sun were huge pieces of meat, sometimes complete legs of a cow, but that could be seen only at second glance as they were covered with layers of fat black flies. Disgusted, I turned and spotted Prince coming in my direction, but with a searching look on his face. When he finally saw me, he was gesticulating wildly at me. "A bag of fleas is easier to guard than you." I had to listen once again. To my surprise, Dorothy came excitedly running up to hug me. Mary smiled at me meaningfully. "Where does this change of heart come from?" I asked suspiciously, assuming the family had put Dorothy under pressure. But this didn't seem to be the case, for Mary explained she didn't know only that Dorothy had spoken of nothing else than me after I had left. I bent down to her to take her in my arms. "Friends?" I asked, and with her pretty face beaming, she nodded. From then on, she was my constant companion, and we made joint trips together to the surrounding areas. In a sawmill, the manager explained to us the exact workflow, showed us the various trees and woods, also the wood factory next to the sawmill, where locally the wood was processed to furniture and other wooden products. We visited a hand-weaving factory and a place where wood carvings were made by hand. I admired all these handicraft works, from the smallest pieces up to 2-meter large sculptures of art. Hand in hand, Dorothy and I were fascinated watching the men at work. The days passed in flight, and Dorothy was, with the help of Mary's translation, always talkative and hilarious like every other normal child. I was happy this child had a little joy, but wondering how her mother had probably died. Anyone I asked this question avoided answering, and no one wanted really to talk about it. Only by the young woman from the spare parts I found out at least that her mother died 2 years ago, when Robert was still in Ghana, but more she didn't want to tell me either. "The families are not talking about it," she reasoned her reticence. Meanwhile, I had also met her husband, a very handsome man. I understood very well why she wouldn't want to lose him. Looking at Dorothy, I spoke to her and her husband. "A dear little girl. I would love to take her to Germany immediately. You also want children, right?" He laughed in a very nice way and said, "Of course. Unfortunately, until now it hasn't worked out yet." I played innocent. "Oh, it will happen." More seriously, he now declared, "For us here, it is the rule that a man is allowed to take another wife if his own wife still isn't pregnant after 2 years of marriage." "But you love your wife, right?" I insisted now. "Couldn't you ride together in the city and be both examined by a doctor? You know, sometimes it is also down to a man if the woman is not becoming pregnant." I didn't get any further because he wanted to know nothing of this. Yes, he loved his wife, but if she got no children, he would have to take another wife, who did. That night I pondered long over this couple on the terrace of the hotel. How a man can be so unfair, so cold, and send away his wife because it was too uncomfortable for him to go together with her to a doctor. Sure, it was the culture, but the young people here watched TV, were connected to internet, and didn't live behind the moon at all. Prince unexpectedly came on the terrace and sat down beside me. "What makes you so thoughtful?" he asked, and I told him the story of the couple. "Rita, you must understand one thing. In this country exists no pension or social insurance like in Germany. It doesn't leave plenty of room for sentimentality. The families need the children to provide the support for the elderly." I hadn't looked at it from that side before. "What about the woman?" Prince shrugged his shoulders. "He will send her back to her family." We were thoughtfully silent for a while until Prince broke the silence to beg me for help with Marion. He wanted me to convince her to hold on to the marriage and not burst it as she threatened him. "Prince, the way you behave yourself towards her, I wouldn't react any different. You don't love Marion, right?" Prince shook his head. "I like her," was his reply. "But you have slept with her before and lived with her. If she now bursts the wedding, then it is your fault. Either tell her the truth, that everything was just show because you need her for the papers, or you strive for her, at least until we are gone. For the time being, you surely can pull yourself together and give her some pleasant days." For a while we both were silent again. Suddenly he hugged me, to my surprise, and said, "I really like you, and hope it goes all at least well with you and Robert." I had to laugh out loud. "You really like me, even though I'm more difficult than a sack of fleas?" We both laughed, and Prince was still holding in a friendly manner his arm around me, when Marion came rushing outside to make a noisy scene. What we couldn't foresee was that she had watched us from the hotel hall for some time, and went into completely wrong conclusions. It took 2 hours to convince her that I was certainly the last one who she needed to be jealous of. That night Prince stayed with her. The following evening a celebration would be held in the village bar. I wanted to dress up, but out of frustration threw the dress I wanted to wear back in the suitcase. It was a power outage, and this could persist for hours. I could forget about ironing my dress. Marion pouted because the fans were not working and the air in the hotel room was stifling hot. I finally decided for a light top and a thin fabric pants. When Prince picked us up, we went first to a supermarket. I was amazed at how modern the place was, equipped with freezers, granite and clean shelves. I saw the prices and started to convert. A shop like this we should have in Hamburg, but with the same prices. Batida de coco for $2. All the food on average for $1 or less. One carton of cigarettes, $2.50. I commented to Marion, "Why do you think everybody is asking you for cigarettes? A pack of 10 cigarettes. This is half a month's salary," declared Prince, listening to what I had said. I realized now how poor these people here really were, and that many of the population couldn't even come to the supermarket for lack of money. Not all lived in poverty, though. We visited friends of Prince, and as we entered the huge villa, I was surprised. This comfort was not even often located in Germany. Modern furnishings, tiled bathrooms with very pretty expensive fittings, a super modern fitted kitchen with all electrical appliances, and on the terrace a generous set of a lovely line garden furniture. The inhabitant of the house was a professional soccer player, contracted in Germany with the first division team. He proudly explained that everything was imported from Germany, down to the bricks. When we arrived at the village bar, the party was already in full swing. Music played loud, people drank and danced, and I was feeling very well in this company. That evening I met another Robert, who was working in Accra and had come home on holiday. Robert's skin was much brighter than all others, and even though his hair was curly but not frizzy like the others. Prince explained to me that Robert's father was an Englishman, but Robert didn't know him. He grew up without a father, only with his Ghanaian mother. Robert is an outsider and has not really contact to anyone. He just somehow doesn't belong to the society. It made me very thoughtful. Was this damn racism and intolerance everywhere in the world? I, for my part, liked Robert, noted that he was very intelligent, and we had interesting conversations while we shared a calabash with a local brandy. Through him I learned a lot about Ghana and the Ashanti tribe. Banished, I listened to the stories he told me. Then suddenly a seemingly ancient woman came to the bar, and I noticed how the talks and the noise stopped. Robert whispered at me, "This is Dorothy's great-grandmother." Why I did it I couldn't tell, but I got up, walked toward her with outstretched hand. In her eyes, which actually pierced me, burned something I could not explain, but suddenly felt fear. I was powerless. I could not take my gaze from hers. Then, nothing. Absolute blackout. Marian, Prince, and his cousins became more than worried and frightened for 3 long days about me because I just didn't wake up, no matter what they tried. I had fever, and Marian stayed next to my bed with cold compresses. Finally, on the 3rd day, I was awake, but initially remembered nothing. I was astonished when Marian explained loud and with much relief, "God be praised, she's awake." Immediately, Prince and his cousins came around the corner, and when I heard it was Tuesday already, and they all told me excitedly what had happened, I was shocked and frightened too. The celebration had taken place on Saturday, and early Sunday morning this old woman appeared. Now I wanted to know more of Prince. I remembered Robert telling me she was the great-grandmother of Dorothy, thus the grandmother of Dorothy's deceased mother. It was all quite scary. No one wanted to give me an explanation, and this woman simply appeared to knock me out. Never before had I believed in things like voodoo or similar humbug, but now I wasn't so sure anymore. Prince conceded only one thing. Here we call it juju. I no longer had fever, and after I drank and ate something I was much better. The same day we attended a funeral ceremony in the village. It fit so perfect, I thought to myself. First of all, I watched the women cloaked in black robes, wailing and complaining loudly. Some men were also dressed in black, but others normal. After the dead man was carried to his grave, the funeral ceremony began. The women still wept loudly, as they now sat together among themselves in groups. Since we were guests, we were allowed to sit as exception with Prince and the other men. Drinks were served, and the crying finally calmed down. Therefore became the talks louder, and also the laughter. I remembered the funeral of my grandmother again, where it was also boozy as I walked away. But what I saw now left me speechless. The women were so packed that they could hardly stand on their feet and staggered. But only the women. "You have some curious customs," I commented, "this hustle and bustle." From funerals to weddings, because our wedding was taking place the very next day, and I finally got to know the man with whom I would appear before the registrar. He possessed absolutely no resemblance to Robert and was much larger. I just hoped there wouldn't be any difficulties on any possible comparisons of photos later. Marian had bought specially for this occasion a wedding dress and stood now all in white, which under these circumstances appeared almost ridiculous to me. The whole thing was done in an unemotional, swift official action. Also, we all went to a restaurant afterwards. But this we did every day anyhow. Then all went back to normal. Only Marion didn't realize yet that the party, which she was waiting for, was already over. When Prince dropped us off at our hotel, it was finally down with her control. She wept openly and cursed him. It didn't help much that he tried to explain to her he had lots of things to do before we would fly home the following Saturday, and it was impossible for him to stay. I actually felt sorry for her and tried to comfort her. I managed eventually to persuade her taking a toast on our wedding at the hotel bar, and this we two then did sorrowfully. Despite increased alcohol consumption, I got no sleep that night. Also, I was already in bed. The light was turned off as it began. Tip-tap, 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 tip-tap. I stood up again, turned on the lights. Nothing. I saw nothing and heard nothing more. But something was in my room. But what? A rat? A spider or a mouse? Initially, I wondered how and where I could start to look, and started under the bed. Nothing. Shit, what now? Sleep with the lights on? But if I slept, and this creature would attack me? Down with my nerves, and tired, I left the field for this creature and sat down initially in the bathroom on the floor. This was, however, inconvenient to me, so I went back. Maybe it was just my imagination, and if not so, it was perhaps already out of the window. But in view of the mosquito nets, could I exclude this possibility? I just let it get to the next, turned the light off, and jumped back into the bed. Of course, it wasn't long remaining quiet until the noise of tapping paws was back again. Now I was overcome with rage. "I'll get you, you bastard!" With a plunge to the light switch, I looked around the brightly lit room. Nothing. This little game we repeated twice again. By the third time, I saw at least a rear hind disappearing under the cabinet. Frightened now, I called for help. The manager and two other employees of the hotel rushed through the open door, and I explained to them that an animal was in my room, but I couldn't explain what kind of animal. With a torchlight, one of the men shone on his knees, all under the cabinet. "Nothing here," I heard him say, while the other two then went down on their knees, sliding around my bed. It was a savory sight. If I wouldn't have been so tired and annoyed, I would have probably laughed out loud. Suddenly, I saw something in the half-light rushing past me and out of the open door. However, I was the only one who saw this, and when I remarked, "Now it has run outside," these men gave me first a strange glance, and then alternated looks in between themselves. The manager offered me another room. What should I do with another room? The creature was outside now. Or what kind of animal it was will remain an eternal mystery. On Thursday, before our departure, was Thanksgiving Day. Robert's family had surprised me with a dress they had made for me. A typical folkloric dress according to the Ashanti tradition, with beautiful, colorful patterns. I was really touched about the gift, and this I wore for the festival. The family was very delighted that I was not only wearing the dress, but also joined in the celebration, dancing at the side of Robert's mother, the traditional dances. It was a beautiful ceremony, and I was in high spirits, but when Dorothy led Mary asked me whether I would take her with me to Germany, I had tears in my eyes. I made Mary explain to her that it wasn't all that easy, as to start I would have to get the permission in Germany to bring her there. Surprising to me, however, was she hadn't asked once for her father during my stay. As a farewell gift, I received from the family a carved wooden figure of a woman representing the pounding of fufu. this would have a place of honor at my home. Beside all the photos I shot, this was a special reminder of a unique journey. The young woman from the spare parts store and her husband invited me to dinner, and now I couldn't really refuse. Once can't hurt, and if Prince doesn't know, wrong, because it didn't take too long until I was suffering from stomach pains, but I was careful not to open my mouth. Friday night we left in the direction Accra to visit the consulate early in the morning. The most difficult part of my mission was yet to come, to have the marriage legalized and certified by the German consulate. Therefore, my wedded joined us on the trip. Again we rumbled over the field for hours, but at least this time the tires were intact. After a hearty breakfast in a cafe in Accra, we sought the consulate. First, Marion and Prince entered the office. Everything went smooth for them, without problems. The marriage had been lawfully registered, authenticated, and Marion needed now to have it recognized by the German Registry Office and thus apply to the foreign police the family reunion. Also, it would take several months, but in the end, Prince would be legally allowed to enter Germany and receive his residence permit. Robert's case, though, was more complicated. Together with the man I had married in Robert's name, I would now, with a passport Prince had gotten issued for Robert, certify the marriage. Then the same procedure as in Prince and Marion's case would start. No one knew that Robert was already staying illegally in Germany. Finally, someone would enter with Robert's passport into Germany, handing over the passport to Robert and apply for asylum in Germany, either with another false passport or completely without. Many Africans did it like this and informed the foreign police that they lost the passport. This way, thousands of Africans entered Germany in the early 90s. Well, at least that was the plan Prince and Robert had made. They would legalize their status and bring others afterwards into Germany. Unfortunately, there was a problem and thus made an end to all plans. My in-law husband suddenly got cold feet and refused to enter the German consulate with Robert's passport, or better, with his passport photo. No speeches and no attempt of persuasion by Prince would change his mind. Even Prince's offer to pay him more money than he already received could not convince him. Also, I tried everything to persuade him, not thinking much about Robert, but more of Dorothy. Without a valid marriage, I hardly had the opportunity to bring the girl to Germany. Nothing helped. He didn't want, and our time was running out. Resign. Prince gave up. I told him I'm sorry that I couldn't help Robert. You've done everything you could. It isn't your fault. I will tell Robert this. He replied anxiously. It became totally clear to me that families and brothers were helping each other much more and with all their hearts, not like it was between the families in Germany. At the airport, the mood was obviously pressured. Prince was deeply disappointed that his plan didn't work out. Finally, the well-being of the entire family depended on the two brothers earning money in Europe, or as a matter of fact in Germany. Marion also was pretty bent, but for other reasons. She had imagined the stay here so very different, and now it would be written in the stars when she would see Prince next time. I couldn't believe my eyes. The return flight took place in a new and modern aircraft of LTU. Unfortunately, I couldn't really enjoy this civilized flight because soon after takeoff, not only my stomach reported back, but additionally the digestive tract started giving me problems, and it became worse every hour. I could neither sleep nor concentrate myself on the board cinema or read. And then happened what I hoped it wouldn't and tried to avoid. I spent the greater part of the flight on the board toilet. I would never even have dreamt of spending the second flight of my life and the landing on the toilet. The return from Düsseldorf to Hamburg wasn't only miserable due to my stomach. I understood now why Prince had warned us not to eat anything at all except in the restaurant. It was also the first of many times that I suddenly felt like choking in this cold country, Germany. I felt like a prisoner after the landing. First of all, the joy of reunion was great, even though Kathy was remarkably quiet. When I asked if anything had happened, she just shook her head. Robert was in a good mood, as always. Even the fact that it didn't work out with the marriage didn't change this. When I was a little better at night and all the others slept, he showed me, so I thought at least, how much he missed me. The second night after my return was the same. Everybody went to sleep, Marian and the children she had picked up from their grandma and Kathy. We spread out our mattress on the living room floor, and Robert wasted no time. This night I received my son. My daily routine began again, but it all seemed somehow to be going down the drain. The office was stacked with work because everything had been left for me, and it started with lots of stress. Incidentally, I tried to find a new apartment, an almost impossible task. Marion, who was during the first days after our return still bearable, advised me to go to the housing office. I followed the advice, but all the documents they demanded from me, it was just madness. And if I did bring everything demanded, payrolls and other certificates, etc., basically always lacked something. So I finally gave up after the 5th attempt, especially since they told me there was a waiting list of about 6 months until I could be helped with an apartment. When I came home from work during the next weeks, I found Marian's apartment every day a little more dirty and misplaced. The floors were dirty. The living room table was full of dirty dishes she had not cleared away. The kitchen looked as if a bomb had dropped on it. Much worse, since Prince had been absent. The children's teeth were not being brushed, neither the hair, and if there was no toilet paper, it wouldn't be used at all. Simple as that. First I did what I could to make it somewhat more comfortable, and also Robert used his free time to clean the apartment. But we fought against windmills. Nevertheless, gave us our daily dose of sex, which we both needed. Soon, however, Marian sat up until late at night watching TV in the living room, instead of watching in her bedroom, where she had a second TV. Robert asked her to consider that the two of us had to get up early by 4 o'clock in the morning to go to work. Hamburg Farmsen for me wasn't favorable at all. I practically had to pass through Hamburg's southeast and then take the last motorway entrance to come off again at the next exit towards Kühlbrand Bridge, the bridge which connects the motorway with the port. The only advantage about this was I could drop off Robert every day at the bakery on the way. Marion gave him a saucy answer. This is finally my living room, my house, and I can do what I want. Yes, her apartment we kept clean and for which we paid a share of rent. Strangely, it seemed as if Kathy wasn't bothered at all in this chaos. On the contrary.